Hello and welcome to Stones and Thrones. My name is Nicholas Avena, and this is my show. I analyze and talk about current events in society, culture, and political news in pursuit of the good things to which we can hold fast and build upon stone by stone until myself and like-minded individuals have thrones that last. Today's Tuesday, August 4th. Little bit different format, just going to jump into a couple of things that were part of the news cycle this week. There's not a lot of tremendously exciting things going on, but there are certainly things that I think offer insights into the state of things. Generally speaking, the condition of our society, the condition of the country, the condition of the West, and I imagine to some degree the condition of the planet. Although not all societies reflect the way things seem to be in the West. Even the way that we report on news is different than what the rest of the world kind of looks at. But anyway, I don't want to slow it down and lose too much energy. My goal today is just to go over a couple of things that have been in the public eye recently. For example, this Anthony Fauci congressional hearing where even though he has a pardon, he invoked the Fifth Amendment for the vast majority, if not all, of his interrogation. But really more, it was just theater. In an interrogation, they're actually looking for information. They're looking for admissions. You didn't get the sense from any of the reporting on this congressional hearing that they actually believed they would obtain any information or that there was really any significant information they were looking for. You didn't get the sense that they had a purpose beyond what was observable in the hearing, which was to perform for an audience, to act incredulous, to sound angry and concerned, to feign outrage and disbelief at the level of corruption, which has become sort of a pattern lately. And I hope people are starting to recognize this because that is precisely what it is. It's all performance. It's all feigned outrage, feigned surprise, feigned concern, feigned incredulity. And both sides do it. Both sides understand the purpose of it. Both sides even seem to be tiring of it a little bit. And I would imagine that the reason that they are tiring of this tactic is because it's no longer having the effect that it used to have. There are diminishing returns in this tactic. The old economic principle of the diminishing marginal utility. So the cost is the same. You have to pull everybody together, but you have this diminishing marginal utility. And the marginal utility, for those of you who didn't do Economics 101, is the value added by the next incremental unit. So if I go and I buy a cheeseburger, the utility that I derive from eating that cheeseburger represents a certain value to me in terms of satisfaction, pleasure, nutrition, and so on and so forth. Then I could buy a second cheeseburger right after I finish the first one. It's going to cost me the same. It's going to take me roughly the same amount of time to eat it, all other things being equal. And it'll still taste good. It might still provide some sense of pleasure and satisfaction from eating it. But as I progress into a third cheeseburger or a fourth one or a fifth one, the cost is the same, the input is the same, the energy is the same, and even if the amount of time that it took to eat it is the same, the utility that I get out of eating it is diminishing. And that's directly related to appetite. And that's what you see taking place in politics. That on its own is a psychological concept that people should pay attention to. Have you ever considered that the manner in which you consume media, the manner in which you consume content online or on TV, is about fulfilling an appetite? Because even if you haven't considered that, the content creators have considered it, generally speaking, most of them. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. The intelligent ones, anyway, recognize that. The networks have long understood this, mainstream media. They've long understood it. And that's why they refer to you and I, anybody, as consumers, because you're consuming the information. And even that is a little bit of a rosy casting of it, because you're really consuming entertainment. And you have a certain appetite for it. In fact, more broadly speaking, we have appetites that are somewhat collective. Like I might have a certain appetite just for politics, broadly speaking. So if part of that appetite is being satisfied by consuming political media or political content, the more that I consume, the more of that appetite is satisfied, the increasingly diminished marginal returns for each incremental unit that I've consumed, the less appetite remains. And that starts to gnaw away at your overall capacity for taking action. You've heard the expression, an appetite for a fight, for example. So an appetite, from a general perspective, is how much of something you're interested in, how much you can take, how much you can handle, how much you consume, or how much you can consume, how much you can talk about, how much of it you can do. So this idea of consumption and appetite, they go together. So when you look at it from that perspective, you can see that this appetite is getting spent all the way around. It's getting spent by the politicians performing these theatrics. It's getting spent by the consumers that are consuming it. There are different motivations, however, so the politicians are getting paid to do it. They consider that their job and their work. Consumers are spending themselves to do it, spending their time and energy to do it. It takes convincing. So anyway, you look at these things like this Fauci play, this Fauci theater, and the takeaway is not even directly related to the hearing itself. The takeaway from this interrogation of Anthony Fauci is more a result of a compounding set of evidence, where we've seen over and over and over again that when it comes to self-enforcement or self-monitoring, policing, internal policing in politics, in government, in law enforcement, anywhere in the systems that are running society, the structures that our society is built on, the one thing that you will see is that the most that any two people will have in common is the amount of their day-to-day living and day-to-day activities wherein there's crossover. That's how judges and lawyers kind of get along. That's how lawyers that are fighting against each other, at least on the surface of things, in a courtroom all day long, end up identifying with each other more than they do their clients. Because clients come and go, cases come and go, litigants come and go, petitioners and defendants come and go, prosecutions and defenses for any particular people come and go, but the actors and the players in that game are still there all day long. They remain. So you have a judge who sits on that bench. He's hearing cases all day, or she is hearing cases all day. You have lawyers arguing cases. They're doing this all day long. They're not just doing it with one case. Even if they're on one really high profile, really labor intensive, time consuming trial, at some point, this trial ends and work with that client is concluded and they move on to the next case. They move on to the next client. And that's how that thing goes. So these judges, these lawyers, they're interacting with each other all day long. These politicians on both sides of the aisle are interacting with each other all day long. Administrations are interacting with the political infrastructure on Capitol Hill all day long. You've heard this expression even used when it comes to the Vatican. Say the popes come and go, but the curia stays. Right? The group of people, these cardinals who elect the popes, that infrastructure stays. And there's a pattern just according to human nature where when it comes to a long enough timeline, especially in the context of a deteriorating society, you cannot rely on institutions to police and govern themselves because their most routine and most regular and most frequent interactions are with the people that they engage with in their place of business, in their profession. So a judge interacts with people in the courthouse more than he does or she does with anybody else, because that's where they spend the majority of their day. Lawyers interact with the court ecosystem more than with anybody else, more than with any particular client, more than with their own family or children even. Law enforcement's another good example. They interact with each other more than they do anybody else. Chief of police spends more time with the officers, captains, lieutenants, with the hierarchy of the force that the chief is overseeing and responsible for, maybe with the mayor or to some degree city council, depending on the structure of that city, how it's corporated or incorporated. They're using a sheriff or they have their own police force or both. They even interact with federal agencies. Your local FBI field office is going to interact with the local community there, the local municipal community. And that's their day-to-day. So that's where they form their friendships. Not too different than a professional environment that's in the private sector. If I'm in a particular line of work, if I'm in Hollywood, for example, I'm dealing with the Hollywood ecosystem. There's so many studios, so many directors. They have guilds that these professionals are part of, actors guilds, screenwriters guilds, directors, casting, the agencies that are representing the talent, the lawyers that are representing the agencies and or the talent and or the studios and or the producers, wherever the money is coming from. They also interface with other lateral institutions. They might interface with law enforcement from time to time. If they have a lot of events and they have security, All of these systems are pretty much self-contained. That's why you have military police. On the surface of things, theoretically, they're the best equipped to handle any sort of police-related issue that takes place on a base. It helps deal with jurisdictional issues because local law enforcement are state or city or county employees, whereas the military is a federal institution. So military police kind of serves a role there. And in every single one of these scenarios, they're interacting with each other. Your place of work probably has a human resources department. I don't mean to belabor this point. Maybe I'm overdoing it. But what it all amounts to is, as systems expand and get bigger, then the participants within the system are the ones most equipped and who have the most access, who are in the best position, are most likely the best able, and theoretically would be the most interested, the most vested in maintaining the order and the orderliness, the integrity of that system that they're a part of. Well, that creates a problem because when it comes to a member of a system, their understanding of orderliness or integrity, security even, is not necessarily based on objective criteria. It's not necessarily based on objective morality. They develop their own cultures within these institutions. Think about your own home, for example, okay? In your house, you might have a theoretical ideal, whoever the head of the household is, you might have a theoretical and ideal view of what's best for the proper functioning of a home. Someone's an authority, you're going to have rules, and those rules can vary from place to place. So each home may have its own general nuances. The only real common factor is that there would ideally be some head. Otherwise, the home is just going to be disorderly. You can't really enforce anything, not consistently. You won't get buy-in from the members of a household if you don't have universal and uniform rules, codes of conduct by which everybody operates and can reasonably expect the other individuals in this household would operate. So even if it's something like when you enter the home, you have to take off your shoes. You can't walk around the home with your shoes on. Another home might be, no, you can walk around the house with your shoes on. That's not as much of an issue because we have somebody appointed every day to vacuum the place or mop the floors or whatever the case may be. So even in a home, you have some establishment of order, but you also have prerogatives and priorities where someone might be in a hurry and they have to run into the house to do something real quick, right? So imagine a Catholic family trying to go to Mass on Sunday. Everybody's in the car, they're waiting. One person realizes, oh, I forgot the keys. They now need to run into the house. The keys are upstairs. There's already unrest. There's stress. Everybody wants to get there on time. They don't want to deal with parking. They don't want to walk in and cause a scene. Maybe it's a big family. So there's a scenario where this individual is going to run into the house real quick, and maybe now there's some general consensus around not having to take your shoes off. So systems are governed with these types of things. You have rules, you have an order, you have some sort of code, and the rigidity with which it's enforced could be varying from highly rigid to not so rigid or even flexible. But as long as it's consistent and predictable, then that's the way that that house is going to be run, and it could work. Well, when you start getting into public institutions, because they are in service of the public good, the types of rules that are established there tend to be more formal. They tend to be more practically and directly tailored to the prerogatives and the obligations of the institution itself. So the overarching purpose of the institution is going to govern what types of rules they have when it comes to running that institution. And not just in terms of like integrity, but in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, could be related to cost effective, or it could be related to success effect. Running the organization in such a way that is likely to optimize the success of the institution. So law enforcement is a good example of this. They have police. These police are going out, they are enforcing laws. They are collecting evidence for alleged crimes or suspected crimes. They have to preserve crime scenes. They have to process evidence. And so they have in a lot of these law enforcement buildings, evidence lockers, places where evidence that's collected could be secured, preserved from contamination, not even necessarily corruption, just even contamination, because they're looking for things like forensic evidence or fingerprints or DNA or any of these types of things that might be critical to the success of an investigation, which then becomes critical to the success of a prosecution. There are threats inherent to these types of institutions, like infiltration, corruption, espionage. The larger and the more significant the municipality, the more likely that you would have these types of threats, because they're existing as part of a broader ecosystem where you have competition, competing interests. And so you just have this ordinary development of norms from the highly formal and regulated to the somewhat informal and only casually regulated. But when you're dealing with a public institution and you have rules or policies that are critical to the proper functioning of that institution and its obligation to serve and protect the public's interest, now you have much bigger stakes when it comes to enforcing those in general, but also making sure to enforce them uniformly. One perfect example is, look at law enforcement. You have a speed limit that's 65 miles an hour. Law enforcement might have a policy for whatever reason at any given point in time that they're not going to ticket vehicles going 66 miles an hour, or they're not going to ticket them at 67 miles an hour, or they're not going to begin ticketing until 72 miles an hour. And maybe they have some degree of flexibility when they're out in the field that is directly related to the proper and efficient functioning of the institution. If you're in a highly populated area, and for whatever reason, it is standard that during low traffic times of the day in a 65 mile an hour zone, the majority of traffic is traveling at an average speed of, say, 75. I'm pretty sure that every major city in this country has something like that. Well, it's not a matter of, in that situation, it's not a matter of, oh, they're not enforcing the law to the letter, and that fact on its own represents a threat to the institution that now calls into question the integrity of the institution and its will or ability to serve the public's interest. It could be the opposite. It could be that to just start trying to pull over every single vehicle that's going 1 mile an hour above the speed limit itself becomes an encumbrance to the higher prerogatives of that institution. The greater the crime rates, the more significant the crimes, the lower priority these lesser crimes become, because you don't have an infinite workforce. You can't just keep hiring more and more and more and more police officers until every single law is followed to the letter. And in a practical situation, that's not even really possible anyway, because what would happen is, even if you could theoretically just hire more and more and more and more law enforcement, well, then people would eventually start slowing down and following the speed limit, and then you just have this massive surplus of law enforcement, which would create vulnerabilities in other areas of government function, right? They have finite budgets. They have defined budgets. So again, I don't want to carry on too long into all of these different areas, but the average person should understand this concept, even though they really don't. But they should, and hopefully that's sufficient to get this point across. You have prerogatives, you have priorities in terms of what types of rules. But in law enforcement, when it comes to something like driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, well, now that's a much different matter than just driving a few miles over the speed limit. And you can see that in enforcement, probably for a number of different reasons. But no one's ever seen a situation where they're driving, they've been pulled over, and then the responding officer detects use of alcohol or drugs, asks the person to step out of the vehicle, determines conclusively, as much as can be done, that the person is breaking the law. So you take a breathalyzer test and you have a higher blood alcohol concentration than what the law allows for. Pretty much every state in the country, I think every single state, every single city has a zero policy or a zero tolerance policy towards that particular violation of law, which makes sense because the stakes can be life and death. A vehicle traveling at high rates of speed is deadly to a pedestrian. It's deadly to someone on a bike. It could be deadly to someone on a motorcycle. It could be deadly to another automobile, to a person in another automobile, depending on the type and circumstances of a collision. It could be deadly to the person driving the vehicle, which becomes a burden. If nothing else, it becomes a burden on the society that then needs to deal with the aftermath of a fatal auto accident. Could be damage not just to the vehicle or to anything around. So it's a really big deal. And you can see this in the policy, the zero tolerance policies when it comes to driving under the influence. It just represents a major threat. You'll see that with walking around with a firearm. Society today is obviously much different than it was, say, in the mid-19th century. Walking around in a major city with a firearm carries with it a very high probability of even getting killed by law enforcement, because of what's at stake. Well, so now what happens when someone gets pulled over in that situation? And we've seen these things before, they've been reported on. And the responding officer gets to the vehicle and recognizes that the driver is one of their own. The driver is also law enforcement or higher up. What if the driver is your local representative? What if the driver is your local senator? What if the driver is a friend, a personal friend of the responding officer? Well, now it's much different. This is where you see in a normal psychological response the contrast between a very impersonal and dispassionate enforcement of law and having to do that where relationally there is a very personal consequence to what's going to happen. That's when people start saying things to themselves about, well, it's not like they are twice the legal limit. It's not even clear that they're really impaired in any meaningful way at all. I just smell alcohol. And in any other situation, I would be ordering this person to exit the vehicle. I would be asking for license and registration. I would be beginning the process of evaluating this situation. I would probably perform some type of field sobriety test. But to even start that process would be to set something in motion that cannot be stopped. Not safely anyway, especially now because you have these body cameras, you have the policies that law enforcement uses for even initiating a stop, notifying dispatch, punching in the license plate and information. So before you even get to the point where you identify this as a friend of yours or this is someone who might outrank you, and that's not even to get to the situation where you're not even really being corrupt because of some form of favoritism. It could even be fear. And that is a very prominent issue too. I've seen it personally, where you might go up there and it's a senator or it's your chief, where you know, like, this person is dangerous. They are vindictive, malicious. And even though they've broken the law, and even though they're aware that for me to do anything not exactly in accordance with the zero policy, they will retaliate. They now represent a threat to me and my own security beyond just my professional position, but even in my personal life. So that is a real situation. But even if you just set that aside, all of a sudden there's nuance where there wasn't going to be nuance before. And the consequences are severe. Well, we're decades into this problem for a number of different reasons. First, it's always easy to pass laws that are rigidly enforced or extremely punitive when it's conceptual or theoretical. It's easy to say we have a major problem here with drunk driving in our city. We have too many deaths. It's becoming a political problem. It's becoming a financial burden. There's a broad range of derivative negative consequences to this issue. And we really need to start increasing our enforcement. We need to stiffen the penalties. And we need to put a stop to this. We really need to drive down this statistic. We're looking at data that tells us this is happening. We've had this many people getting behind the wheel under the influence that have been pulled over. This many people who caused an accident or loss of life even before they got pulled over, like the damage took place before we could even find out about it and put a stop to it. We need to decentivize people from doing this. We need to scare them out of doing it. We need to raise the stakes and make the penalty very severe so that that fact alone will start reducing the number of people willing to take the risk. And that makes sense. But that's about managing a statistic. That's about managing a number. And it's a lot easier to do that and to acknowledge maybe even the necessity to do so when you're dealing with a number and you're dealing with numbers that affect you. Like if you're the chief of police or you're the mayor of a city or you're in some way directly connected to the success or failure of handling this issue in a city, and to fail is going to directly impact you in your career and maybe even in your personal life. And we now see that all across the country. And I know it's a global issue, but we're here, we're an American citizen. And so this issue does eventually affect us in a huge way. Well, here's the bad news. That ship has sailed. You cannot trust your government to enforce the laws equally. You cannot necessarily trust your government to enforce some laws at all. You cannot trust government to be honest about what's taking place. You cannot trust your government to police itself. So now what do? Well, for starters, you have to pull your head out of your ass. That's the takeaway from this issue with Anthony Fauci. You have to pull your head out of your ass and stop consuming shit. When you watch these performative proceedings and you see that Anthony Fauci, who has a pardon and theoretically couldn't be prosecuted for anything that he says, he couldn't be made to pay a price for anything that he says, and then he chooses to invoke his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and not self-incriminate, you need to understand that there's two implications to that, at least two possible implications. One, and the more obvious one, is he may not have the confidence in his pardon that you would think somebody ought to have according to the law. His pardon may only extend to certain potential criminal behavior that doesn't actually cover all of the criminal behavior. And he couldn't talk about the one without exposing the other. There could be a situation where he could be afraid that someone might just say this wasn't a valid pardon and it's not going to be honored. In fact, I believe the statement that President Trump made about honoring the pardon was after the hearing. And if that's true, well, then there you have it. If you're asking the question, are you going to honor this pardon? Well, then the implication is you don't have to. Who's going to stop you if you don't? At the end of the day, I think we all should already know that the law is an asset to whoever has the power or the authority to enforce it. But the law is an asset. If the law is in your favor, it helps you. If the law is not in your favor, it could represent a threat to you. It could be useless to you. So that's the first implication. The first implication is Anthony Fauci may be looking at his pardon and recognizing that while it's helpful to him because of the way the law works and because of the authority of the pardon, because of the authority of the person who issued the pardon, it's helpful to him, but it's not an invincibility cloak. That's the first implication. The second implication is maybe Fauci is not protecting himself with his silence, at least not directly. Maybe he's protecting people who don't have pardons. Maybe he's protecting the people who pardoned him. Maybe he's protecting people who he believes are powerful and who would be unmoved or undeterred by the existence of his pardon if he was to do or say something that represented a threat to them. That second consideration is the more serious one. although they're both serious, the second consideration is more serious. Because the first consideration is about the integrity and the strength of the system. It's about the system itself. The factors that go into it is the law itself, the authority of the order, the power of the order, the integrity of the office held by the person who issued the order, the president. It's a matter of the integrity of Congress, right? Fauci has to think about the integrity of the people who would seek to disregard either the pardon itself or to disregard the authority with which the pardon was issued, or he could be concerned that they would disregard the law itself, or maybe he could be afraid that they would not operate in good faith and that they would try to find ways to justify, well, scratch that. They might find ways to say that it's not a valid pardon. They might say, we recognize the authority of pardons. We recognize that they're irrevocable or something to that effect, but this was not a licit pardon, or this pardon only extends to these crimes and not to these other things. And if we ask them more specific questions, then his pardon wouldn't extend to those areas because they're not covered by it. Any number of things. He could have any number of reasons to be concerned, but that's all as it relates to the system, this self-contained system, these senators, congressmen, district attorney, Department of Justice, investigative bodies, intelligence agencies, federal and local. Those are all part of the system. Whereas the second issue, the idea that he's afraid that if he was to expose or create vulnerabilities for people who might be implicated, and that they would not be using the law or trying to manipulate it or having to take steps to circumvent it, but that they would operate more outside of the law. Obviously, the implications are much bigger there because that speaks to a weakness in the entire political system, the entire governmental system. All you have to do in that situation is ask yourself one question. Do you believe that, for example, President Trump or any senator or any governor of any of the 50 states, I'm just giving examples of very high-ranking, very powerful, very authoritative offices in this country. More or less, we are the most powerful country in the world, at least on the surface of things. More or less, we have the most powerful, most advanced military in an objective sense. Obviously, it might not be as useful to us as we would want it to be, as illustrated with the situation in Iran. But we might have the most firepower, the most ordnance, the most advanced weaponry, the most voluminous arsenal, maybe the largest population for a country of our type. We've got a big population. We're not like China or India, but we've got a pretty big population. So in a lot of ways, it's a good example to look at something and say, do you think that the president of the United States, this one or any president, or the governor of any state, any of the 50, by virtue of being the head of a state, but also being the head of a state in the richest, most powerful country in the world, notwithstanding the qualifications that I just expressed, ask yourself this question. Do you think any of them, any governor or president, ever thought to themselves, if I do this, I could get killed? And before answering that question, let me be specific about what I mean by this. Do you think any president, let's use modern times, let's say in the last 50 years, any president in the last 50 years from 1975 to today, do you think any president or governor of a state thought to themselves, as related to an obligation pursuant to their office and the oath that they swore when they took that office, if I am faithful to the oath that I took, I could get killed? And if your answer to that question is yes, you do believe that some governor of some state, or many governors of many states, or some president at some point in time in the last 50 years, or more than one of them, have actually been in situations where they thought to themselves that should they fulfill their obligations pursuant to their office, in accordance with the oath that they swore when they took office, doing so could represent a threat to their lives. And if the answer to that question is yes, well, then you already know we have a major problem. I think everybody knows we have a major problem in this country. And here's why. From coast to coast, in all 50 states, in probably almost certainly every major city in this country, in every single level of government, in every single institution or body of government, every single department within the government structure, you have people who would and routinely do choose not to fulfill their obligations. They choose not to perform the duties of their office. They choose not to behave in accordance with the oath that they swore when they took that office. But more than just that, they choose to do things, to take action, and to behave in ways that are not only forbidden by the office that they hold, or forbidden according to the oath that they swore in a court of law or in view of the public, but that would even be forbidden to any ordinary citizen, like driving drunk, participating in theft, covering up crimes, allowing the innocent to be prosecuted or imprisoned, turning the other way in the face of corruption, or behaving corruptly themselves, stealing money, helping others to steal, creating systems or participating in legislation that is actually designed to create opportunities for theft or other even worse crimes. And they don't do it because not to do so would represent a threat to their lives. And they don't neglect to do things that they have to do out of this fear that if they don't neglect to do it, it could represent a threat to their lives. They will do it for any number of reasons, among which are maybe just a favor to somebody who's a friend, maybe a tit for tat or a quid pro quo. And by tit for tat, I mean maybe like a little retaliation for something that somebody else did that bothers them. And so they abuse their position and their authority to fire a shot or take a little jab at somebody. And by quid pro quo, I mean like a favor to another equal, lesser, or greater officer or office holder pursuant to their own ambitions. Could just do it for the money, personal advancement. They could do it because they were blackmailed. They could do things in order to obtain or create blackmail on adversaries. They could violate privacy laws in order to conduct surveillance or spying operations for no other reason than just to create a catalog that could be useful politically, a catalog of compromat for any number of reasons and every kind of reason at every single level of government, in every single institution of government, at every single level of each of these institutions, at the city level, the county level, the state level, the national level, in the military, in each distinct branch of military, in the judiciary, in the legislature. Everybody knows like there are and have already been identified, exposed, and prosecuted corrupt judges, corrupt senators. Remember Blagojevich? Was that his name? Dude who was selling his Senate seat? You think he was the only one to ever do that? Was he the first one to ever do it? Did no one know that he did it? Is no senator currently aware of any other senator doing something like that? This is the state of America today. That ship has already sailed. And not just America, but our concern is America. The ship has already sailed. So now what? What do you do now that you know you cannot trust your government? And you can't, not at any level. It's not a matter of every single police officer in your city is corrupt, or every single deputy or sheriff in your local area is corrupt, or every single judge at your local courthouse is corrupt, or every single legislator at your local level or state level is corrupt. That's not the issue. It's that you would never know who's corrupt and who's not. And that fact alone makes it entirely unreliable. You cannot trust the institutions that are governing you. You have to view the institutions that are governing you with distrust, with caution, with fear. And I would suggest you should view them with antipathy. They are not only not your friends anymore, they are not only not servants of the public of which you are a part, they're not only not a servant anymore or a public servant, they're not even safe anymore. Your government represents a threat. to the very principles that government was erected to protect, promote, preserve, and uphold. There are members of your local law enforcement who represent a greater threat to you, your liberty, the safety and security of your family than gangsters on the street. Here's why. If you are dealing with drug traffickers, their focus is trafficking drugs. That's what they do. That's where they get their money. So the whole institution and organization surrounding the trafficking of drugs serves the purpose of generating wealth. What they do with the wealth or how it's used at the top, that's a different issue. But the machinations of the operation serves the specific purpose of creating wealth for whoever is running the operation. It represents a threat to you insofar as you might ever find yourself, intentionally or unintentionally, in between any particular agent of that organization and the goal that the organization is trying to accomplish. So if you witness a crime taking place by drug traffickers and you are understood and known as a witness, you're identifiable, and you're on law enforcement's radar, well, then the trafficking organization, the cartel, whatever it is, would view you as a threat because you could give information to law enforcement that represents a threat to the drug traffickers. So you could end up in danger as a result of that. But as long as you're not standing in the way of the business that they're conducting, as long as you haven't witnessed or don't in any way represent a threat to that organization or its prerogatives, generally speaking, you're going to be ignored. You won't really matter to them. You might not be relevant to them. You could sort of stay out of their way. But a corrupt government official, even at the level of law enforcement, represents a much greater threat. Because law enforcement, they have a code of conduct. They have obligations to protect and serve the public for whom they enforce the law. They have standards that are imposed on their supervisors and their peers, pursuant to the institution that they're a part of. They have authority that they can impose on you. A drug trafficker doesn't. If you're driving your car and a drug trafficker, for whatever reason, starts chasing you and trying to shoot at you, well, you can flee. And generally speaking, that chaos would probably draw law enforcement, who would be focusing on the vehicle that's chasing you and shooting at you. The general public seems to still kind of operate with a sense of justice and respect for human dignity and, to some extent, law and order. So they might even start to intervene, if in no other way than just calling 911. This happens all the time. In fact, almost in the vast majority of cases where you have a major crime taking place it's not typically the victims who are calling law enforcement. They're generally busy trying to evade or escape or protect themselves, and it's the witnesses that will call law enforcement. But if a corrupt police officer is chasing you and they flip on their lights, there's a presumption that you're guilty or you're the bad guy and they're the good guy. And it would be a long time, best case scenario, it would be a long time. Highest probability is you would never have the chance to protect yourself or tell your side of the story. But best case scenario, it would be a long time. You would be deep in the mouth of the beast before you had a chance to protect yourself or defend yourself or attempt to exonerate yourself. And by the time that moment arrives, you are already deep in the belly of the beast, where the whole thing is corrupt. And here's why. Because when you have a corrupt police officer, they would not be able to survive without two fundamental and necessary components to their corruption. One, other corrupt officers. If they were the only one, it wouldn't be tolerated. There would be no reason to tolerate it, because that represents a threat to the system. If you are operating in a way that draws negative attention and risk and scrutiny, especially undue or unwanted scrutiny, they will oust you. You see this in politics. That's why someone like Eric Swalwell will get pressured and booted. And then whoever the other guy was who was running for governor in California, who also had to withdraw from the race because of the same types of allegations. When you see the system collapse on someone, well, you know that person is a threat to the system. It's just not worth the trouble. And that person can be successfully isolated and kicked out, and being kicked out, they don't represent any sort of retaliatory threat to the system itself. So, in an expression, more trouble than it's worth. So in law enforcement, if you had a corrupt police officer and they were the only one, it would be more trouble than it's worth. There'd be no reason to keep you around. You might not get booted at the very first policy or law that you broke. Maybe you could explain it, but when I say corrupt, I mean through and through corrupt individuals whose corruption is essential to their character and being, at least as far as concerns the office that they hold or the duties that they're performing on a regular basis for the institution. So a corrupt police officer would not survive if that officer was the only one. So the first critical component for that system is other corrupt officers. And they don't need to be doing the same things. They just need to be doing things where the punishment or the consequences might be the same. But you also need another critical component. And this is where it gets sad, almost ugly. You need the officers who are not corrupt for whatever reason to be willing to abide in that system. Whether they're just okay with the corruption or they do not have the courage to stand up against the corruption, that second and equally critical component to the corrupt enterprise is people who are willing to stand by and do nothing. Those people view themselves as innocent, and they are not. They are not innocent. In some ways, they're the worst. The corrupt are completely and fully enemies of the good. Evil is categorically the enemy of the good. It's easy to identify evil as the enemy. A police officer who openly steals money or openly commits acts of violence with impunity by virtue of the office that they hold is evil. A police officer who abuses the authority and the power that they have to carry out criminal acts of whether violence or theft or anything else, that without the office that they hold, they wouldn't even be able to do it, are easily identifiable as evil and can easily be treated as such, or at the very least, it's easy to justify treating, approaching, and dealing with such a person according to what they are as evil. But the coward who is not evil, who's not committing criminal acts, who's not overtly abusing the power, when push comes to shove, the coward preserves the system. And here's how this works that you need to understand. One corrupt government official can be taken down or taken out through the use of legal means, through law enforcement or whatever else. A couple corrupt actors in a government institution could be taken down or taken out through the use of legal means. The government itself can expunge corrupted elements. They have the authority and the power to do it. A small group of corrupt actors, usually we would call them like rings, right? They'll call them a ring of corrupt actors, a pedophile ring, or a fraud or theft ring, a ring of thieves. It's more difficult, but the system itself can still expunge that elements, but the labor is exponentially more than just trying to get out one or two, because now you're dealing with a small system within a system. And it takes more resources to identify where it's all taking place. But you're still dealing with evil, like one evil person, two evil people, a small group of evil people, and then in that worst case scenario, a group of integrated and organized evil actors. But that's all one category. It's still evil. It's still easily identified as such. And with the right will and resources, you can approach it as such and investigate it, prosecute it, and expunge it as such. But when the actors who are not on the other team, who are not actually enemies of the good refuse to take action in the face of evil deeds and evil doers and stand by while this evil action is taking place, who refuse to speak up about it, or worse, refuse to admit that it's happening or acknowledge that it's happening for weakness, cowardice, for fear, for apathy, whatever the case may be. Those people are contaminating the good, and they're contaminating the system in such a way that makes expunging the evil components of a system impossible. It can't be done. The best example of this is anybody who's been in a legal environment or in a courtroom where there's corruption. When a lawyer will not admit that there's corruption in the courtroom, then of necessity, they end up participating in and benefiting from the corruption. Here's what I mean. Say you hire a lawyer. You're now paying this lawyer to go and bring claims of wrongdoing on your behalf against defendants that you're going to pursue through legal means and through litigation. Well, if that lawyer knows that you've now ended up in a courtroom with a judge who is corrupt and is going to favor the defendant in a way that contravenes the law, or in other words, the lawyer knows you are not going to obtain justice in this situation, what are their options? Are they going to tell you, you know what, this judge is corrupt? Well, if they did, wouldn't your response be, well, then why aren't you reporting this? Don't you have a duty as an officer of the court to report this to the appropriate authorities or to a judicial oversight committee or some form of that? What do you mean that this judge is corrupt and now I cannot obtain justice? Can we go to another courtroom? Can we get another judge? Like, the answer is probably going to be no. Like, because you'd have to have a basis for making such a request. And this is a real example, by the way. This is not theoretical. I have actually witnessed it myself, and I've had conversations with legal teams about this exact thing. So then what? You have to drop your litigation for no reason whatsoever and then try to bring it again at a later time? You can't do that. That'll be totally prejudicial to you. You might not even be able to do it again. You have to explain why you're dropping a litigation. You have to explain why you're requesting a different judge. And the system is rotted through and through with this situation. So now who's a bigger threat? This corrupt judge didn't steal money from you. They're just a corrupt judge. They may not have done anything to you at all ever. You are not a victim in any direct or immediate sense of this judge. This lawyer may not have intended to rob you. What happened was you went and you hired this lawyer. That's an ordinary part of the process. This lawyer then inspected or investigated or researched your claims, and let's just assume that they found that you do have a claim. The law has been broken. You have a very, very high, if not a 100% chance of success. They may determine it's almost certain you're going to prevail in this litigation. Then they took the case, They signed on as your attorney of record. They've now notified the opposing parties they are representing you. They are now drafting their claims. They've communicated with the other side. Everything's on the up and up. They've done work you already owe them money for. You probably already paid them for. You probably had to put down a retainer in order to get them. It wasn't until the case was assigned to this particular judge that they realized, oh, shoot, we're going to lose. This judge is corrupt, and they are going to favor that law firm, or they're going to favor that defendant. So I can tell you what actually happens is they will never say to you, we're screwed. They will just carry on as if they don't know you're going to lose because they're dealing with someone or some part of that process within the legal system that will not only not work as intended, but will work exactly as it is not supposed to work. They will not only fail to deliver justice, but they will be proactive and eager, maybe even zealous, to carry out an additional injustice. They will not only fail to obtain the financial remuneration that you are owed, but they will take more money from you. That lawyer will still conduct business when you are long gone with the impression that they're just doing what needs to be done. They're doing all that can be done, and that they just have no other choice. That is the state of this country. And the issue is, once you have that, once you have a system that cannot, will not, or doesn't even have the will to expunge its criminal, corrupted, and evil elements, you no longer have the ability to destroy the evil in the system. Your only option at this point is to destroy the system itself. The evil actors in that system are only responsible for the evil that they've done because they set out to do it, and that was their intention. They never intended to uphold the laws or to enforce the prerogatives and the edicts of the system, or to act in a way that serves the good of the public. They're just corrupt, bad, evil people who got in, and that's their focus, and that's what they are. But they don't have the ability to destroy the whole system. They only have the ability to abuse it and to harm other people with it. The system has the ability to expunge its own corrupt elements. And the system is made up of the people who uphold it and defend it and carry out its prerogatives, its mission. And then it does have these evil and corrupted elements. So the system is made up of all of them. But the failure of the system itself does not fall at the feet of the evil that's in it. The failure of the system falls at the feet of the people who stood by and watched it. Because the evil and the corruption in the system does not have the power to change the prerogatives or the mission of the system. Evil and corrupt police officers do not have the power or the authority to change the law and reorient a police department and redefine its mission to go out and act as if it's a drug cartel, or to go out and act and operate as if it is a criminal organization to rob the people. The evil elements in an institution do not have the power or the ability to do that. But the actors in a system who are not carrying out or participating in this evil conduct, they do have the power to make use of the system, drawing on the authority and the prerogatives and the mission of the system, drawing on the public's trust in the system and the public's vested interest that the system carry out its missions and prerogatives in accordance with the law that serves as its foundation. The people who are not committing acts of evil or participating in the corruption have the ability to do all of that. Yes, to do so would create an internal war. The good elements versus the evil elements. But they have the system itself at their backs, whereas the evil elements do not have the ability to change the constitution of the system itself. So the people responsible for a situation where those external to the system, the public, outside entities, outside agencies, federal law enforcement, for example, if you are dealing with a state institution, the people responsible for circumstances that create the necessity for something external to the system to gather together, rally, and then destroy that system are the people who were in a position to do good and chose not to do it, who were in a position to expunge evil and chose not to do it. Now take that and apply it to your home, apply it to your families, apply it to your group of friends, apply it to your church community, apply it to your local city or local government, apply it to your organization, to your business, to your nonprofit, to your clubs, to your guilds. Apply it to every system with rules, prerogatives, a mission statement, a hierarchy, any corporation. Anywhere you are, any group you are a part of, any community within which you exist or operate, where there is evil that undermines the mission and prerogatives and purpose of that group or community or institution that you're a part of, where you stand by and you watch evil take place and you don't say anything about it and you don't do anything about it, when the time comes and that community or group or system collapses in on itself or gets destroyed by something external to it, you have no one to blame but yourself. And when you look at the country coast to coast, and you can see for yourself that all 50 states are corrupt, the federal government is corrupt, every level of society is corrupt, every institution in society is corrupt, every layer of every individual institution is corrupt, and you observe that you could never know who is corrupt and who isn't corrupt, who is trustworthy or who is not trustworthy, and you process the fact that the institutions and the structures that are there in service or were supposed to be in service of the public good, that were supposed to serve and protect you, the institutions to which your tax dollars are going, that you are a financer of and a participant in, and you recognize not only can you no longer trust these things to do the good that they are supposed to do, but you must now view them and treat them with mistrust and distrust and operate from the perspective that these institutions are threats to you, to your safety, to your security, to the integrity of the communities or smaller groups that they oversee or have authority over. You have no one to blame but yourself. If you are one of those people who, in any corner of life, is a member of a group, however small, even if it's just your own family, and you refuse to speak out against and take action against and rally your community against evil or any conduct or deed that stands in opposition to the mission, prerogatives, and purpose, or even just the promises that are part of or should be presumed in that group, all the way down to the family level. And the reason that the culture at large is in the situation that it's in is precisely because it was corrupted at the family level, and the smallest groups and the smallest organizations first. America has rotted from the inside out. Good families failed to speak out against and take action against families that spread evil and corruption at the most basic level of society. Churches failed to expunge and excommunicate corrupted elements within their own bodies. The priesthood failed to extirpate sexual predators and thieves and Judases from among their ranks. Religious orders failed to exterminate corrupted orders. They failed to speak out against and take action against corrupt actors within their church or corrupt bishops. Good religious communities have failed to speak out against and rally the faithful against the civil bodies that were corrupting their communities. Dioceses have failed to speak out up against or stand up against and speak out against other dioceses that had been corrupted, had become political, who became enmeshed with civil institutions for money or anything else. And the result is a society and a culture that is no longer conducive to living out a faithful life in peace. If you recognize that and you are there, now you are at square one. So for Catholics in particular, we have three groups in the church. You have the church triumphant, the souls of the dead who are already in heaven. They have triumphed over the three threats: the world, the devil, and themselves. You have the church suffering, who are waiting for their crowns in heaven, and they do dwell in suffering, but they no longer have the ability or capacity to lose their salvation, for whom the church triumphant, in a general sense, cannot do much. Generally speaking. And then you have the church militant. And that's every Catholic in a state of grace who's alive on earth. You are the church militant. You are soldiers. You're supposed to be. We all are. Whether in times of peace or in times of war, a soldier is always a soldier. In times of peace, a soldier lives out their desires and makes use of their freedom in peace. But if you are Catholic and you're existing in this country today, or you're existing anywhere in the West, generally speaking, and you don't understand that these are not times of peace, if you don't understand that the situation is only going to get worse before it gets better, and if you don't understand that your role and obligation and purpose in the community that you're in, however small at each layer and level, meaning within your family, within the friends and relatives that your immediate family might function or operate, within the community that that group exists in, within the network of communities that your community might interface with, like your church maybe with another church, or your church with the local little leagues, or your church with the local nonprofits, or any form of social justice or activism, the city that these groups interface in, the network of cities that these groups operate amongst, wherever you're at every level, in every layer in which you operate, if you are benign in the face of those who are eagerly and zealously doing good, and those who might eagerly and zealously, or even selfishly, but carelessly and casually doing evil, if you are benign to both of those groups, meaning the eager and zealous do-gooders have no use of you because you're neither eager nor zealous in the pursuit of good, and those who are eager and zealous in the pursuit of their evil or selfish aims do not find you to be an obstacle or threatening in any way whatsoever, if they're not even uncomfortable around you, you're going to be the one responsible for the destruction of your community, of your church, of your system, of your family. You will be responsible for that. If you're a father and you are the head of a household, and anybody else in your household, spouse or children, live out things that are opposed to the prerogatives and mission of the church, things that are opposed to a life of faith, things that are opposed to the whole and integral development of the individuals in your household, anything that represents a threat to right and good formation in the faith as a member of the church militant. If your household is not equipped for battle, or any member of your household is not equipped for battle, and you've done nothing about it, you are responsible for its destruction.